All right, guys, we ain't got no formal intro, but welcome back to the Go Getters Coaching Podcast. I am your co-host, Andy Feta Chan, Dr. Andy Feta Chan. I'm here with the homie.
What up, guys? It's been a minute, but happy to be back.
Yeah, I think we had a first episode, and then we had a couple of things that we're working on. But no, we're excited to kind of formally relaunch everything and kind of give you guys just more value on the front end side of things because there's only so much that you can really learn when you're zooming through Instagram, scrolling up and down. But like with a podcast, it's like, all right, there's usually no distraction. You're probably listening to this on a commute, on your run. So we're just excited to start breaking down some topics and questions that, we've been fielding from Instagram, fielding from emails and stuff like that.
For sure. Yeah, we've got a super awesome topic for you guys today. It's actually talking about, if you are working in a regular insurance physical therapy job, how do you actually transition into starting your own thing, right? Whether it's, hey, like, should I just jump in full time into my own thing, or hey, like, if you're somebody who's a little bit more risk averse, should you maybe start off more part time, right? Kind of like test out the waters a little bit, and then eventually kind of transition back in. So. When me and Andy actually both started our own thing, we actually had very different approaches into like jumping in. So, kind of want to share with you guys a little bit about like how we actually ended up doing ourselves, and then share a couple of pros and cons of each of these strategies as well too.
Yeah, I don't think there's one approach that's right. And there's definitely some circumstances and things like you got to take into consideration because Peter and I both went completely different approaches. And I think you'll get advice from other people, and there's different ways to supplement as well. So I'm like super pumped to chat about it. But Peter, how did Motion RX come to be about?
Yeah, so when I first started, I actually started working in an insurance physical therapy practice first. I just recently graduated. Um, After graduation, I had always known that, hey, I want to kind of start my own thing and stuff. But I didn't really know kind of where to start. And for me, I'm like super, super risk averse. I just graduated, like didn't have anything saved up. And then obviously I had a couple professors telling me, hey, like probably get a couple of reps in. And so ended up graduating, took a regular insurance job. I was there for about 2 months and then COVID hit. So I actually ended up getting let go in that time. And then right after I got let go, had still started out my cash practice in a gym. Was seeing, maybe like one person a month, really. Like cash flow was like super, super bad, right? So everyone out there like thinking that, hey, I just crushed it from the beginning, like that definitely wasn't the case. But I actually decided to pick up home health at the time in order to kind of supplement my income. And so when I was still working part-time in an insurance practice, the hours were like pretty strict, right? It would be like anywhere from like 7 to 3, or from like 10 to 7. So wasn't really much flexibility in order for me to either like go out and market, or really just like kind of see clients and stuff. So um, I ended up deciding to opt for home health on the side because it ended up offering a little bit more flexibility, and then also pay compensation was a little bit higher as well too. So believe it or not, for my first entire year, man, I just like dragged my feet seeing home health and then slowly built up my caseload over the first year. So it's definitely, I think like this part-time approach is definitely really good if you're like somebody who's like super risk averse, and really just kind of want to see like proof of concept first, before kind of like jumping all in. But I'll also tell you this, right? So my first year, I think my average per month was around like 4K. And then month 11, month 12, I think I cracked 10K like 2 months. And then after that, that was really when I decided to jump in full time. And the minute I jumped in full time, dude, in like 2 months, we cracked 20K. So there's definitely like a really, really big pro to like jumping full time, right? Because you can basically dedicate so much more of your time and attention to it. But you don't really know what you don't know until you are had the opportunity to kind of look back on it. So yeah, that was kind of my approach when it came to starting up Motion RX.
Yeah, I think we had a similar story because like when I graduated, it was August. No, it was the August 2019, and I got passed the board exam that following November, and I started work in 2020, beginning like really started
Yeah,
work
beginning of COVID, right? Yeah.
couple of months in. I actually stuck with the job, and I was at a network practice, so I was already in a very similar model, but Christy as well. She was actually in the out of network practice, but she had a terrible experience with her previous like employer. Just like comments being made a little bit misogynistic, and I was just like, oh, yo, just get the fuck out of there. Like, we can help you find another job. And
Yeah.
she found another job right when, like, literally a week before pandemic hit. So that was really tough. So obviously the company that I was with before, it's like we're all hands on deck. I'm still really good friends with the owner and some people on the team. And it's just like, hey, let's just keep the ship afloat. So we did absolutely everything. We're doing like online kettlebell classes. We were doing like youth athletic development in the park. When we slowly got back into the space, we were things started to ramp up honestly pretty quickly after COVID because I think people started to realize like how important it was to stay healthy.
Yeah. Up in just curious, because I know like I'm down here in Florida, you're up in New York. Like, when did things actually open up for y'all up in New York?
I would say late summer, it started to like become more normalized that like, hey, I'm gonna consistently go to a physical therapist. Obviously, have your mask on and stuff.
Got
But I
it.
would say late summer is around the time because I remember it's like, oh, late summer we were getting a boost in the clinic that I was at, and then like second COVID hit in December. People were
Yep.
like,
Yep.
oh
Yeah, I
man,
remember that. Yeah.
we're gonna go back to where we were before. So in that clinic, I took a lot of rows and I was there for almost 2 years. But initially when we started and I started the clinic, you couldn't fill out a contact form on the website. So everything was just word of mouth through the owner's phone, and that's how people came in. So it's like I rebuilt the website twice, and ended up seeing a lot of sessions there. So I was like anywhere from like 35 to 40 one-on-one sessions a week at the semi-private. That time we had semi-private barbell training. We had two clubs that I was helping out with, and I also managed 75 online athletes for kettlebell programming. So I had like my hands in everything. I took sales calls as well. I was just kind of
Let's
like,
go.
yeah, it was funny because like when I jumped ship, people were like, why are you starting another practice? And I was like, I didn't own that practice. Like
Yeah.
people just associated me as a probably an owner because I was doing a lot. So similar to Peter, I when I quit again, it was like Christy and I both didn't have a job, and Christy was seeing a couple of clients on her own, and that was kind of paying the bills. And when I made the transition, I was like, all right, I don't know what to do, so I'm gonna do home health. And I only lasted towards the orientation of the home health day. So
Damn, dude.
yeah, I went to shadow another physical therapist
Yeah.
in Queens, and he was helping this one person that had a double shoulder replacement and three hip replacements.
Yeah.
And the previous therapist never cleared a hip flexion, like to past 90 degrees, so he couldn't even sit up on a chair. And I'm watching this session go on, and I'm reading the guy's chart. He's only in his mid 60s. So I'm like, it's unbelievable that he's essentially needs to get transferred out of bed and put in a chair. And I'm just like, I think that I'm gonna burn out again in this model because it's such reactive care, right? It's people that haven't prioritized being healthy. So I got home that day, and then Christy was like, "How was that?" I'm like, "I know I didn't even start yet, but I quit." Like I'm not gonna be able to do this home health thing because it's absolutely miserable.
Yeah.
Uh, I was super fortunate that like, up until that point in, gosh, that's like 2022 or 2021. I'm losing track. 2021, September
Mhm.
of 2021. I've been doing everything I've been doing, essentially running a practice myself, like wearing all those hats.
Yep.
The first month, I think I did enough to survive. I think I did 6K per month, and it just slowly increased. And then by December of that year, so within 3 months, Christy and I were both bringing in about 10K, and that was just all lead flow from like the network that we've built.
Yep.
And it's been slow and steady growth kind of from there. But I was scared as hell initially. But I think the first time that someone comes in, they're like, "Hey, I'm willing to pay you this amount of money for a 10 session package to get out of pain," you're kind of like your jaw drops.
Hmm.
And when you do enough where like you're essentially recreating your income before, it's like, oh wow, like we can do this. It's a proof of concept.
For sure. I think there's also something to be said too when like your back is against the wall and like, all right, I got to generate at least like 5K to like pay rent or 6K at the very minimum. It's just like kind of lights a fire within you to like go out and hustle. I think that was also something that probably like almost like probably hindered me tremendously in that first year was I always knew that I had like a safety net, right? Supplemented from like the home health income that probably didn't like go out as hard as I should have.
Yeah, I think I'm the opposite in you. It's like I'm not very risk averse. I'm almost risky to a fault. Like by the time I graduated from physical therapy school, I think I had like 12K in credit card debt from like
Hmm.
taking seminars and courses and stuff like that. And when I stepped out to do things on my own, I had like 3,000 bucks, no credit card debt. By that time, I paid off all my credit card debt, but I only had 3,000, and I was gonna have to send Christy like 1,500 for rent. So I
Yeah.
only really had 1,500 to my name at that time, and then I was just like, all right, here we go. Like
I
let's
mean, if there's one thing to bet on, like you got to bet on yourself, right?
yeah. So that and I think that's one thing that I always think about. It's like, and people say it's I don't want to say it's easier to grind for yourself. I think you just have to understand that at some point you're capable of grinding. Like if you've never been able to put in like a 60 to 80 hour work week consistently,
Hmm.
I think entrepreneurship's off the table for you. Like honestly. But if you've been able to grind and of course it's going to be easier to grind for yourself, but if you just can't grind in general for, the company that you're at or your employer, whatever it is, to me, like that's more of a important proof of concept. Like how much shit can you eat, or how long can you keep your head down and like do the work? Because if you're someone that gets kind of burnt out fairly quickly, I think it becomes really, really difficult to
Yeah,
jump.
100%. Because I think like when you're just working for a company, right? Like the main thing you're doing is, like aside from your situation, the primary and main thing you're doing is mostly like client care. Right? But all of a sudden, you step into entrepreneurship. It's like, holy shit! I've got marketing, I've got sales, I've got lead gen. I've got to make sure like someone's calling the leads. I've got to make sure I go out and like generate lead flow. I got to treat clients as well too. And all of a sudden, like, yeah, those hours add up really, really quickly. But I think like the good thing to kind of like appreciate is like once you hit those like 60 to 80 and even like more hours a week, right? Once you've experienced that, that like almost to you, like it almost allows you to recognize like, hey, I have this gear that I can like click into like if I need it. Right. It's like, yeah, it's like we're probably not going to be grinding, 80 hours a week for, a year, 2 years straight. But it's like if you need to grind for a season, like 3 months at a time to like make it through this hump or whatever, like I know for sure, like, hey, I can like lock it into this gear and like make it through. But yeah, it's like if people have never like felt what that feels like to work 60, 80 hours a week, like it's a shock to them initially at the beginning.
Yeah. No, it's funny because like the PTs on our team, like when I do like a full day of treating, like if I'm there from like 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., they're kind of like, damn, I didn't know you still got that in you. I'm like, bro,
Mhm. I'm built
it's
for this shit.
I'm like the callus is still there. Like you can it's one of those things where I'm like, I don't think that's gonna go away anytime soon. You know what I mean? Like you just gotta know that you can get into that gear and like be able to perform at a high level for, those 12 hours and consistently show up every single day. Because it is like tough, right? Like, and in the beginning there is more work. And I think the things that we learn, it's like if we were dedicating our time to the right work, it would have made the process a lot smoother. But
Yep.
in entrepreneurship, it's like you're throwing a lot of stuff at the wall and just kind of seeing what sticks and then
You
doing
don't
what
know till
yeah.
you actually try it, right?
Yeah, and that's the difficult part. But yeah, with jumping ship, I would say that was one thing that allowed me to go all in on myself from the get-go. Was like I knew that I was capable of working 60, 80 hour weeks
Hmm.
consistently and do things at a high level. And I told Christy, I was like, worst comes to worst, I'll Uber Eats. Like I'm not gonna let us live on the streets. Like I'll Uber Eats, I'll pick up
For
a
sure.
random gig, an administrative job, whatever it is to pay the bills. I'll make it work because I knew that I was way too burnt out at my other job, and there wasn't any room for upward growth. And
Hmm.
that was something where it's like it's kind of the burn the boats mentality. But I think if I were to do things again, like what kind of job would I pick up on the side? I probably wouldn't have done home health. I feel like I would have gone into like group fitness instruction or something. Like I feel like
Yeah.
if you teach at like an Orange Theory or an F45, like
Yeah,
just a great way to put yourself in front of more people. But like, what
for
do you?
sure. Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. Believe it or not, so the gym that I was set up at, it was a CrossFit gym. So I actually ended up coaching like a couple CrossFit classes in conjunction to that. But man, dude, I'll tell you, man, like group fitness is like it's a whole animal in itself, man. Like you got to be like super, super like high energy. It's super funny because I'm a pretty big introvert, so I like my energy goes like pretty fast when I have to be like super up high up tempo all the time, right? So I remember like maybe a couple times where I coached like two or three CrossFit classes back to back in a row, be like yelling at people, pumping people up, and then I would have like a PT client afterwards in that gym, and then I would go to them and be like just like super quiet. I'm like, dude, I'm dead, bro. So kudos to all the coaches out there that are just like super high energy all the time in the classes and stuff.
Without a doubt, bro. Like teaching, and I'll leave it at this. It's like I think I could teach 2 classes a day. Like I know some coaches that do like 5 classes a day. I'm like, how do you still have like your vocal cords? Like that's absolutely crazy.
For sure.
I think
Uh,
the I am typically more risky, but if I could do it over again, I would probably take an approach that was probably more similar to yours because I think it's easier to build when you're thinking in abundance opposed to scarcity.
yeah, so let's chat a little bit about like pros and cons of each, right? So um for part-time, like the part-time transition, right? I think pros definitely like, hey, have a little bit more kind of a quote unquote safety net built up. But at the same time, I feel like that quote unquote safety net can also be like a con in itself, right? Like for like we can kind of just compare like my revenue to like y'all's revenue. It's like, dude, you guys hit like 10K a month in like less than like what 5 months, right? And for me, like because like I didn't have any time like really dedicated towards like the cash practice, like it took me a whole year to finally hit that 10K a month. Right. But it's like, hey, like in the back of my head, I almost kind of knew. I was like, all right, I always have this like safety net of like consistent revenue stream coming in and stuff. And then like pros and cons, any other pros and cons you can think of for like part-time transition?
Yeah, I think like there's a like especially the way, we do sales, it's like I don't want to sell something to someone that doesn't necessarily need my help or my service. I
Yeah.
want to sell like, based off of like the person's needs and if I can fulfill them at a high level. So it's like when you're like thinking in that abundance mindset, it's much easier to do sales. But when you're thinking about, okay, I need to pay rent, and
Yeah.
like
It's
so
it's a
like
lot of freaking stress, man. Yeah.
yes, so the pros of like I think this part-time aspect of it, it's like it's a little bit less pressure and you can do things that really feel true to yourself opposed to like it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? It's like if you're trying to figure out how to survive, that's not a good place to do business from. So it's like if your bottom line is taken care of, I think it does give you this peace of mind where like you can sleep at night and you can show up better. But that comes with like you have to be aware of like am I really leaning on a safety net or do I, you have to be honest with yourself and have that conversation.
Yeah. 100%. And then pros and cons of like jumping straight into it, right? I think like pros is definitely just like, hey, like you'll probably see like a good bit of like revenue jump just because you have, you're able to dedicate, all your time towards it. You can really go all in on it. But at the same time, like cons is definitely like, hey, like, do you have the capability to handle like all these added potential stressors that you're going to experience of, hey, like, where am I going to have rent for this next month covered and all that?
Yeah, and I also think it does depend on like where you are at because like there's certain places I think demographically that lean towards like being able to speed up the process quicker. Like I found that like a lot of people that I know in New York, like the phases and initially are really, really slow because it's really hard to do like, consistent workshops in New York City because everyone's just like no one's really
Yeah.
sitting around, talking to one another, and everyone's just like doing the class. Sometimes even leaving early. They don't even do the stretch after the Orange Theory class
Yeah.
with the piece. They give you like a 3 stretch cool down, but some people are already dipping because they
Yeah. The
make
pacing.
it time. So it's like I think in certain areas, if you're focused more on like this kind of one-on-one relationship and potentially leveraging that, that's just something to be mindful of because, with one-on-one relationships, those are like a long-term thing. Ideally, you're friends with these people and you want to see them win. And it's not like, oh, you're not generating me leads. Well, I'm going to stop talking to you. It's like
Hmm.
it's less predictable, but if you kind of build and carve out your community, you have people that are always willing to support you. Like I think the degrees of separation between like moment and like the New York City fitness scene is like, one like just if you don't know us, then you know somebody that knows who we are. And that's something that we've been able to build, and I think that's why we've had success with the burn the boat approach, because I spent 2 years essentially being inundated within the New York City kind of fitness scene. But the cons, it is like you got to be someone to understand that has some sort of idea of like how to fill your time. Because if you
Yep,
burn the boats and you're just twiddling your fingers, like you're better off like at least making some sort of revenue, right? Like working somewhere else per DM. But if you're like, hey, I know that I'm someone that is gonna go get a bunch of lunches and coffees. I am, gonna be hitting up these boutique fitnesses and seeing if there's any collaborations. I'm going to be creating content. I'm going to be learning some skills, whether that's like copywriting, email marketing, etc., or I'm going to be building lead magnets. Like, if you're someone that can fill your time, I think the boat approach is good. If you're someone that needs like a ton of structure and you kind of pick up things slow, and you might be someone that like really needs like a lot of mentorship and like a steady growth, like it wouldn't make sense to burn the boat because you're just going to stress yourself out.
for sure. Yeah. That's actually a good point. So let's talk a little bit about kind of like mentorship, right? And so I know for you, like, hey, like going into like an out of network practice, like you probably got like a really good, set of like mentorship, especially initially coming out as a new grad. And then you also have like, I know like one of the big things for us while we were in PT school is like professors always pushing you towards like residencies and like fellowships and stuff. Right? And then same thing, like, hey, like go get your reps in like an outpatient clinic. And so I feel like there's like definitely specificity towards like this, demographic, right? So like, what would you say like would be like the best way for somebody to kind of like get quote quote like reps in to be able to prepare themselves to be able to like succeed from like a client care standpoint, like in this private pay outpatient model?
Yeah, I think there's always like, and I had this great bit from Dan Martell. He was like, we know a lot of people that work hard, and some of them are wealthy and some of them aren't. So we know the common denominator is not being able to work hard. Then we know a lot of people that don't work that hard, and some of them are wealthy and some of them are obviously not wealthy. So who should we study, right? We should study the people that like don't work hard and make a ton of money. Like that is like, what is the North Star? Like, what is the shortcut in all of these ways? So it's like we know a ton of great physical therapists that have residencies. We know a great ton of a bunch of physical therapists that don't have residencies. So
Yep.
it's like, all right, the common denominator is not getting your residency anymore. So what is it, right? And I think it's more of a personality trait.
Yep. 100%.
I just had a phone call with someone that is interested in joining our team, and I'm like, and he's like, how what is one trait that the PTs on your team have, or like, or that you think is important to have in order to be successful? And I'm like, I think the people that we want to surround ourselves with, when they don't get an outcome that they want for a patient, they are actively trying to solve for the, during their free time. Meaning they don't just go, oh, person's back pain isn't getting better. I'm not going to bring anything to the weekly meeting to help troubleshoot this. I'm not going to try to go to PubMed. I'm not going to try to, ask for more resources. I'll just see what happens next week. Maybe I'll find something on Instagram. It's like, I think if you're someone that is a little bit more resourceful and you're willing to leverage the people around you, like there's certain clinics that actually do provide mentorship. There's a ton of free resources on YouTube where you can like learn about sprint mechanics, plyometrics. There's so many things out there. So if you're someone that really needs a ton of structure, and there's a lot of people like that, residency might be a good route to quote unquote get the reps. But if you're someone that's a little bit more crafty, the pay cut that you take from residency in a normal job, it could be anywhere from like 10 to 20K. Just start to pay for
Mm,
the courses that would be able to help you become a better clinician. But what
for
do you think?
sure. Yeah, because I think like especially in today's day and age of like technology, and especially social media, I would say like, hey, like find like a clinician out there that like you really respect, and I'm sure like they probably have some resources that they could probably point you towards, right? Whether it's some sort of like direct mentorship or some just like free stuff like on YouTube or Instagram, right? Like there's so much access to like resources and education these days for free. I think the one of the potential like downsides of like residency or fellowship, right, whatever it is like whatever clinician that you're assigned to, you're probably going to be molded into whatever their biases are. You know what I'm saying? It's
Yeah.
like, like especially I feel like in a lot of residencies, it's all very like heavy, like manual focus and research focus, right? Which is great for, for certain situations and scenarios. But then like for you, you only get exposed to that like one person's like, framework, right? And mindset. And whereas like if you kind of just like, hey, pick out maybe like five different people with like different like things that they're all really, really good at, and you almost kind of like start to like develop your own like framework and stuff. I think that like that's probably the best way to really allow yourself to become like a well-rounded clinician instead of kind of just like getting inundated with just this like one framework that you may learn in residency. 'Cause I think like there's specific residencies that like they're really big on this like one thing, and that's what they're like quote unquote known for. And then for you, like you come out of there like being a pro at that one thing, right? Um, and then I think like with like the myth of like, hey, like you got to get your reps in like a traditional insurance setting. Like the demographic that you see in an insurance setting is not really demographic that you see in a private pay setting. It's like I remember like in when I was working like either home health like or in a traditional outpatient, like it was a lot of like workman's comp. It was a lot of like Medicaid clients, right? It was like very, very low level client where you just like you had to beg them to do like sit to stands or even like work on balance and stuff with them, right? Whereas like, like the clients that we're seeing on a day-to-day basis, everyone's like super advanced and super active. And so I think like one of the best ways that you can kind of develop like this like one-on-one relationship is kind of similar to what you were saying before. Like, hey, like find a part-time position like as like a coach or in some sort of a group fitness setting. I think like personal trainers, dude, they have like phenomenal like communication skills. Right. And so like if you can kind of build that up and like have some sort of fitness background where you're either like going through it yourself or you're like coaching somebody else through it. Because really I think like with our model, a lot of it is really just like kind of strength and conditioning principles, being able to progress and regress certain things. Then like you'll be in a pretty good like position to treat clients in this like specific cash pay setting.
Yeah, I would say I completely agree with you with the getting reps. Like I generally do believe everyone should work in a commercial, like kind of like I don't want you I don't think there's a lot of physical therapists that I would say like, hey, you graduate school, you should start your own practice right out the gates. You would have had to be like a personal trainer for like a couple of years prior to doing it for me to feel like, yeah, this is, you've got what it takes. I think in the beginning, you just have to get good at like it's the corny things they tell you in PT school. You got to good at time management, right? You got to put your hands on a lot of different bodies. Like you're now responsible for your own caseload. So like in a one-on-one setting, how long does it take for you to get up to like, consistently seeing or like seeing your first 100 people? For some people, that could be a couple of months. For some people, that could take a year, a little over a year before they see their first 100 patients. You go to an insurance clinic, that takes a week. Like
Yeah.
like you're gonna be like within like a month, you'll be at like 100 patients per week. And it sounds ridiculous, but I think those things allow you to potentially see like develop your eye for certain things, apply what you're doing, and not feel so not feel so at like risk, meaning like, if someone commits to working with you for a higher ticket price, you're like, oh man, I've got to show this person every single session why what we're doing is valuable.
Mm.
Whereas in insurance clinic, it's like you might get the eval wrong, you might get the first three sessions wrong, but it's okay because they're going to come back because they have insurance. So it allows this kind of trial and error period if you're super intentional about it. But if you're like, hey, you have knee pain, long arc quads, sit to stands, and maybe next week, if we're super advanced, we'll do some single leg bridges. You know what I mean? Like if you're like doing cookie cutter approaches, you're just not going to succeed regardless. But if you're like super intentional, like, hey, I am gonna, apply this intervention, people aren't getting better. Okay, when I reflect on this on my commute home, what could I have changed? Like that's when the reps actually are helpful.
Do you feel like it's almost like an internal confidence thing as well too?
Yeah, I think there's certain things that happen to a physical therapist that I think allows them to start to feel good about their craft. Like the first one is like when someone actually looks you in the eye, shakes your hand, and says, "Thank you so much, you changed my life." Like those are things that people remember when you collect testimonials, and maybe the patient doesn't say it to you in a session, but they're like, "Oh, Dr. Peter is the best. Like he's the best physical therapist, healthcare provider I've ever worked with." Like I save all these random testimonials, and when times get hard, it's like I'm gonna
Yeah,
look
you
back.
gotta look at them. Yeah.
There's certain like emails I've gotten for patients where it's like it just reminds you why you're on this path. So
Yeah.
I think there is like that internal confidence that occurs, but until you have these experiences where you realize like what you do is valuable, that starts to shift a little bit. But as you start to raise your stakes, that it's like imposter syndrome to me like never leaves. You just
Hmm.
keep raising your standard of like what you're capable of doing, so that imposter syndrome creeps up a little bit, you know. At some point we had imposter syndrome about like, you know, you come home from kindergarten, they're like, hey, Peter, you know how to count to 10. Can you count to 10? You're like, damn, this is hard. I don't know if I can do it. But we've been in imposter syndrome so many times. It's just what changes and why is it still around? I keep trying to do things that are slightly more difficult. But, you know, physical therapists need to have those general positive outcomes. They need to change some lives. And I think that happens when you know, get reps in these kind of commercially owned clinics.
Yeah. So like, for someone kind of out there listening, right? Like they're like, they may be like, hey, like, all right, I'm getting my reps in. I'm in an insurance setting. Like, how long do I, is it more like, hey, like a time frame thing, or is it more kind of like, hey, like I feel ready now. I'm checking these boxes off, like, hey, I'm getting good outcomes. Like, because I think like this time frame may happen in like maybe different for everybody, right? Like for somebody who like maybe just like they may not have as much confidence. It may take them like a year and a half, 2 years to kind of get to this point where you're talking about. Maybe somebody else like, hey, it takes them like 2 months, right? And they're like, boom, like I feel good, I'm ready to go.
Man, I think there's this kind of, and I think we've been growing up in an age where it's like entrepreneurship is cool. Everyone just wants to be an entrepreneur. Some people just aren't cut out for it, right? Like, I just want to put that out there. It's like you might be better off just continuing to work at a
Yeah.
different clinic, and you take that, you know, very typical insurance-based clinic role where it's like you're the regular therapist, you become the senior therapist, you become the clinic director, you become a regional director, and it's a lot of this like paperwork and insurance stuff that you have to navigate because some people just aren't cut out to be entrepreneurs. But if you're like, okay, I absolutely hate this model. Like, I know from the get-go that I was going to continue this model. I'm like dreading going to work and like I'm starting to feel like I'm hitting a wall. I think that's when you start to move away from it. There's two things that I would typically say. That's one of them, right? Like when you feel like you're about to hit a wall, and then when you feel like you've outgrown all the positions and the other
Mm.
positions that they're kind of presenting to you don't even interest you. It's like I hate what I'm doing as a physical therapist. So why would I become a clinic director and train other people in this model that I don't, you know, necessarily resonate with? Doesn't make sense. So the upward growth doesn't seem attractive and your day-to-day is no longer attractive. It's time to start to figure out like what is that exit plan? Like what do you think?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, man. I was thinking about too, like when I initially moved to Jacksonville, I was thinking, man, like, man, if there was like another cash clinic like in this area that was already like, decked out with like kind of like the one-on-one like sports environment and stuff, like I probably honestly would have just straight up just like worked for them. But I think like, yeah, it's exactly kind of with what you said, right? Like, hey, like if where you're currently at, there is no like opportunity for you to either continue to grow up or be in an environment that like brings you joy and stuff. Like it's time to be able to figure out how can you actually like create that for yourself. I remember there's like when I was still working at the insurance clinic, like in my first 2 weeks there, I submitted a request to get like kettlebells there in our clinic because all the heaviest they had was just like like I shit you not, like it's I know it's so cliche, right? But it's literally a 10 pound pink dumbbell. And I'm like, all right, like I'm so gung ho. Like, we gotta load these people up. We gotta get some kettlebells and stuff. And, so I submitted, like, I had a chat with my clinic director at the time. I was like, hey, like, what do you think about getting some like kettlebells, maybe like 25, 35, 50, so we can actually load people up? They're like, yeah, like, let me think about it. I got to send this up to higher ups and stuff. And like, dude, the 2 months I was there, like, we still hadn't got those damn kettlebells in, right? So it's like, if there's no like environment where you feel like you can kind of like treat clients to the way you want to be able to treat them, right? And then obviously if you have that checked off, and then like if there's no other like further growth opportunities that fulfills you from like a career growth standpoint, then yeah, like how can we actually be able to kind of create this environment for ourselves, right? So yeah.
Yeah, and then when you kind of hit that point, it's like, again, I am the more risky type of person. If I do these things over and like how I would consult people is completely different. Yeah, if you start to hit that point, I would think about like, all right, what are your spendings month to month? Like, what is your budget, right? Like, I think things that you have to take into consideration is like being able to pay rent, being able to pay your loans, having food on a table. And if you're like, oh, I am part of a jujitsu club and I don't want to stop doing jujitsu, like all these miscellaneous membership subscription things, it's like, what does that look like? Right? Because then you can start to realize, like, okay, then I can take at the bare minimum, maybe 15 home health clients, and that'll take care of that. And I can focus my energy elsewhere. But having some number in your head of like your kind of monthly expenses, I think is the next like logical step. But like, what are things that like when you were kind of coming up with that budget, like were you thinking about like, oh man, I wish I accounted for that?
Yeah, so I think for me, it was really just like I knew at the time I was like, all right, I need to be able to figure out rent. I know I got to be able to figure out like have like credit card debt, and then that was pretty much it, right? And I think like for me, I knew that I wanted to initially like try and get into it because if I waited any longer and had even more responsibilities, such as like having a kid and stuff, like you just have way more responsibility and that like risk awareness just kind of continues to like go up higher and higher, right? But at the time, like fresh out of school, it's like I was just like, all right, it's pretty much just me. It's fine. Like you'll be able to take care of myself. And I knew I can kind of like fluctuate a little bit, right? But yeah, I was like, if you kind of go back and look at the P&L, it's like, man, like every single month for like the first like I think it was like 8 months, man. Like we didn't really even crack 5K at all. So I was like, man, like that really didn't give me enough like of a confidence boost to kind of be able to like step away and transition from. And then yeah, like towards the end of that first year, I had 2 months where I hit 10K. And then I think for me, 10K was really kind of that number where I knew like for sure I was like, all right, like I think like this is enough proof of concept where I know I can kind of like make this work and it's time to like kind of double down on it. But yeah, that was 10K was kind of like the number for me to like trigger the jump into like full time.
Yeah, if and it's almost like you can kind of take averages, right? Like if you've been hitting a 5K and you hit a 10K, it's like on average it was 7,500 per month. Can I live off that? I could, right? So it's like and especially in the beginning, it's never going to be like a consistent flow, but it's like whenever you hit a new high, the floor slowly moves up. So like you're probably at like
Yep.
5K, you hit 10K, then your next low month was probably closer to like a 7K opposed to being back down at 5K. Then you're at 777. All of a sudden you hit 12K. You hit 12K, then your new floor becomes 8. And then it's just this cycle that keeps happening when you look at it. But I think a good way, it's like having enough data. Like you might come out hot because people always want to support you initially when you're launching something, right? But then what happens like within a year? I feel like within a year you kind of get a good data point of like what's going on. And if you can have 3 consistent months and you have an idea of like where these things are coming from, then I would feel more comfortable. But if you're like, hey, it's just been like hope marketing, meaning like I'm not really doing content marketing. I'm maybe doing a workshop here and there. I'm kind of talking to some people. I have no idea where these leads are coming from. I wouldn't jump ship yet. Like you need to have some general idea of like what's been working as you've been building in the past year so that you can at least have some idea of like, okay, I can pull this lever when I jump ship. But if you just jump ship and you don't know what lever to pull or you haven't been doing anything consistently, it's like you don't have more time and not have activities to fill them with.
For sure, yeah. I think I remember too, like one of the things that people have to kind of recognize, like the first month that you kind of decrease your hours a little bit to like open up more time for the cash practice, whether it's like, hey, you're decreasing from like 32 down to like 24 or whatever, like your overall revenue is still going to be about the same. Because that first month that you decrease your hours to be able to spend more time in the cash practice, you're basically like setting up the foundation for revenue for the following month, right? You're setting up all these events, you're doing the lead gen and stuff. And so a lot of times it's just like, hey, like be a little bit patient with it. Like look at things from like maybe like a 3 month period of like and do exactly what you said, right? Hey, let's look at the averages of it. And then from there, like let's make a more calculated decision on, hey, like all right, is this working? If so, awesome, sweet. Let me continue to kind of decrease hours even more and dial in what the one thing that has been working.
Yeah, and like with what we know now and like being able to curate these offers, like when we both first started, it was like, oh, when people come through the door, it's like the lifetime value of a patient has just been one package. Like there was no ongoing offer. We didn't even know how to position these kind of things. So if you were to start over again, it's like it wouldn't take nearly as long because you'd be able to create different offers for people to kind of keep working with you on a longer term basis. and that becomes more predictable, revenue for you. And you have less of this like, wow, I had a really good month, 10K. Then the next month I had 2K. I'm just spending it fulfilling, and boom, I'm back up to like four. And it's like it's so erratic. Ideally, you have like a tighter range that you're operating with, so that emotionally it doesn't feel like quite the roller coaster. But there's so many things that you can do now with resources and the things that we know that would make that process way smoother.
For sure. And it's funny, man, like my first like 8 months, I didn't sell any packages at all. It was just in person, they would pay when they come in. Right. And so I think like selling pencil care packages that like towards the end of that first year, that was like a very, very big difference. And like we can almost kind of like work backwards on like on the math, right? So it's like, hey, all right, if we know we need to hit a 10K month and on average each like planning care is around 2K, then like it's probably just around like five new evals we need for the month. And if you kind of think about it like that, it makes it way less daunting, right? It's like, all right, I know I need to get one new eval a week. Okay, how can I get one new eval a week? If I know I need to get one new eval, how many like events do I need to do or whatever in order for me to get this one eval a week so that I can actually get to this 10K month?
And it's I like breaking it down to those numbers because it's like it's very cut and dry. And then you can start to figure out it's like, oh, I've done two workshops, four workshops this month. Two workshops I didn't get anything. The other two workshops I got two. So it's like, how can I do more events with that particular company, or like, what's the commonality between those two places, right? Um, there's random, as you're in business, you'll start to find random people referring you things like, uh, I've heard like hairdressers, like, oh man, you get in with a hairdresser and all of a sudden the hairdresser's sending you a bunch of people. I've had construction people send us a ton of people. So it's just once you start to realize these patterns, you can devote more time to certain key relationships. But yeah, it's good to put those things on paper and start to reverse engineer it of like what do you need in every, given month, and break it down to a week. And within that week, like what can I do today to start to move things forward?
Yeah, 100%. I think the biggest thing about like entrepreneurship and like business is like you want things to be as predictable as possible. All right. And so for us, like we pretty much have like it's so dialed in where we know our on average, every single workshop, we probably convert around 30% of participants. And then same thing, like, hey, if we have like a certain number of like Facebook leads that come in, we probably convert around like 30% of leads. And so you can kind of work backwards on the math of like, it's like, okay, cool. If I know I convert at least 30% of workshop participants onto a plan of care, how many people do I need to get to actually show up to an event so that I can get this one planet carrot to convert, right? And then that's the case. Okay, hey, like how many of these can I do in order to hit like my goal number of evals every single month? And so, yeah, the worst thing is just like, hey, like not knowing if one month you're gonna get like a set number of evals or like next month you're gonna have a different number of evals because then we kind of have this like unpredictable roller coaster ride of evals, right? But yeah, a lot of times it's really just like, hey, you won't really know like what the quote unquote average is or what to expect until you get enough like repetitions in at this one thing.
Yeah. I I was thinking about that before. I'm like, oh man, I just need to like recreate. I just gotta be able to when you start thinking packages, it's like, oh, this is easy. I just gotta get, you know, four evals in a month. But you realize it's like when people say, oh, when you build it, they'll come, like nothing fucking happens. You gotta be out there.
Yeah.
So that's the fun part about entrepreneurship. Like, you're saying before, it's like some people are built for this, some people aren't. And it's just like, how much are you willing to put yourself out there? Because I feel like every couple of months, you're just putting yourself in more and more uncomfortable situations. And those ultimately, those are the things that lead to growth. But there's so much friction to like putting yourself out there, code outreach, and obviously a bunch of people telling you no. But I think those are the things that eventually, build a really good entrepreneur and like help build your character.
Bro, I feel like just building cash practice has done so much like self-development overall in these last few years. Dude, bro, I hated public speaking, man. And like I still remember like my first like workshop presentation I did, like I literally had to like sit there and like practice for like hours of literally just like, all right, like, am I gonna get this right? And like, I knew the material in my head, but literally just the fact of like getting up there and like talking about it verbally with people, even though like, hey, I knew the material better than anybody else, like, bro, my voice was shaking so hard. And so like, but the thing is just like, all right, got the first one out of the way. Okay, cool. Like, and then the more and more you do, like you just like get better at it. And all of a sudden, like I still like don't really enjoy public speaking to this day, but it's like it's something that I'm very proficient at now, just because I've like done so many of these like quote unquote uncomfortable situations, right? It's like yeah, like hearing that first no from like a lead or from like your first eval, it's like a gut punch to your stomach. It's like you've never heard no before, right? Like growing up, like everyone's always like, "Oh, great job, good job, you're doing great." And it's like all of a sudden someone tells you, "No, I don't want your help to fix my back pain and get me back to deadlifts." You're like, "What? What the hell? Like, did I like what's wrong with myself?" But then, yeah, you just kind of develop these things over the course of time. And it's yeah, it's been a pretty fun, rewarding journey overall.
Yeah, there's two things I think I want to leave people with. It's like as you're navigating like entrepreneurship, like we've I don't want to be the type of person that leads people astray. This is super easy. You come on and like you're gonna go to the moon. Like it's no, it's fucking tough. Entrepreneurship is tough, but the tough things in life are super rewarding. And I think what makes it easier, it's like there's two things. I look at entrepreneurship as like what you're saying, like a self-development perspective. And most of the time, I think businesses stall because the person that's running the business stalls himself from a self-growth perspective. And once you pick up on that, it's like, oh, if I keep developing, I honestly think the business just becomes a reflection of the person running the business at some point. And I see that ebb and flow with what we do. And then the other thing is like just having a higher purpose. Because like if you're just kind of in it for the money aspect of it, that might be intriguing initially, but like it just won't be worth it. There's way better ROI skills that you can
100%.
be learning for money. Like you got to be genuinely passionate about the craft and the impact that you're making because there's going to be days that are tough and it sucks, but you'll kind of like be able to zoom out and be like, wow, this what we're doing is awesome. We're helping people that have been in chronic pain, haven't been able to get help anywhere else, and we're getting them back on the ski slopes. We're getting them back to like we had a client that climbed Mount Everest. We had like people that run like 100-mile races after like significant injuries, and it's like that's freaking dope. And I think that's the hope. We were chatting before the call. It's like it goes back to impact. Like if you focus on the
100%.
impact,
Yeah.
you'll always keep chugging along.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, well, guys, hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully it gives you guys a couple different like insights onto, whether or not you should jump part-time or full-time. Um, yeah, anything else for our listeners, Andy?
No, we created some pretty dope documents. So like free stuff for you guys. So if you're interested in it, just shoot us a DM. We have a ebook where we give out 100 different ways that we've generated leads, things that we've utilized that have been effective. So if you follow at Go Getters Coaching on Instagram, just hit us on a DM with leads, just that, and then we'll send you the link so you can download it. And we're also creating a content marketing playbook. So if you want that one, just say content marketing, and if you want both, just DM us both, and we'll send you the link. But appreciate you guys for listening, and yeah, we're just gonna keep funneling value down your throats.
Keep getting after it, guys.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Appreciate you guys for tuning in.